I'm sorry, I had lost you all while I was trying to pull up Amy's bio. Hi, Amy, how are you? And then, of course, my um, printer is going, so if you hear something in the background, I apologize about that. But welcome to the Indiana Healthcare Marketing and Public Relations Society's um, WCAG webinar. Our guest presenter today is Aimee Morgan. And Aimee is the president and CEO. But before I get started, I wanted to give you a little background for those who aren't familiar and were invited by a member of IHMPRS. Who we are. We are based out of Indianapolis, and we are a membership organization working to provide um, resources in terms of marketing, public relations to those who work in the healthcare marketing public relations sector of healthcare. And so I'll go ahead and introduce Aimee again. Thank you, Aimee, for agreeing to be our presenter today. Aimee Morgan is the president and CEO of Good Aim Communications. She's an award-winning WBE certified marketing communications company specializing in branding, website development, um, ADA compliance, and advertising. Aimee is the author of the #1 Amazon bestselling book, The Chaos Antidote, A Fable About Mindfulness, and its companion guide, The Chaos Antidote, 6-week mindfulness workbook. And again, I apologize that my printer will not stop. She also is the host of the Mindfulness Academy podcast, where she interviews doctors, authors, high performance coaches, and more. She's available for corporate team and small group training seminars and speaking engagements. Aimee lives in Indianapolis with her husband Jeff and their 2 children. She enjoys hiking, reading, and spending time at her family's cabin in Brown County, Indiana. Again, thank you, Aimee, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Nakia. Would you like me to just go ahead and hop in, ladies?
Sure.
Okay. All right. I'm going to share my screen and we will hop right in. I'm seeing some more faces. Love it. And Robbie. Hi, Robbie. All right. All right. Here we go. All right. Is that looking good to everybody? Can you see my screen? You have to talk because it took over my screen. I can't see thumbs up.
Yep, we are good.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about WCAG and what it means for healthcare organizations. Before we hop in, I'm going to tell you just a smidge about Good Aim so you understand who is speaking to you. We are a full service marketing company established in 2012. We are WBE certified and we are headquartered here in Indianapolis. As Nakia mentioned, brand development, website, ADA compliance, and advertising are our specialties. So this just give you a little snapshot of where we are. This is our office in the historic Fort Bend neighborhood. We love it here. And this is our adorable office cat, Skippy John Jones, just for a little cute factor before we hop in. So as we all know, with website compliance, fine is not accessible. What fine does for a website is that it locks real people out. And we know when there are compliance issues that there is some friction, right? And sometimes it's even for folks who do not experience disabilities. So that's always something to keep in mind. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. It also creates a brand trust risk if your site is not compliant. And as we all know, it does create a financial risk, and we'll get into a deeper dive into that as we get deeper into the presentation here. So what we'll cover today, I do like to start with kind of what to expect. We'll talk a little bit about what is changing with ADA compliance. We'll talk about what WCAG 2.1 AA means in real language, and you'll get some meat and potatoes around that. We'll also talk about common gaps, specifically that we see in healthcare organizations. You will walk away with some practical fixes that you can even start looking into today for your own site and platforms. We'll talk about a 4-step compliance process that if you were to work with someone like Good Aim, we provide these services, or with someone else, kind of what you could expect if you haven't really traversed down that road yet. People are a whole bunch of different places, which we were talking about before everyone hopped on the call. So just recognizing that, and I'll try to speak to the different places that people are. And lastly, we have a Q&A and kind of some next steps, some other things that you could consider. I do have questions that Nakia was so kind to pass along from some of you and those who have registered. And I will go into those first. And if there is additional time, I'm open to answering more questions. So why accessibility matters now? Why are we doing this right now in February? It really affects a lot more people than teams realize. According to the CDC, nearly 29% of adults in the United States experience disabilities, and that's a lot of folks. So with that many people, it really is a patient experience issue, as well as that brand trust issue that I mentioned earlier. When folks are coming to you for support and the services that they desperately need, that really is an issue. Kind of makes sense. And the deadline is here at the end of April. And I will mention Robbie Schneider, who's on the call today. She and I have been going back and forth. There is a little bit of confusion, even among some of the, it seems like some of the government agencies around that specific deadline. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. According to ADA.org, this is the deadline, and I will talk about the different entities that this applies to. However, it sounds like HHS lists a slightly different deadline. So I did want to acknowledge that in case there's a little bit of dissonance in your mind as you see that date. So who we are serving when we fix these issues with accessibility, there are folks with visual disabilities, and this can be complete blindness all the way to just different levels of seeingness. The other part is hearing disabilities. There are folks, again, who are completely deaf, and there are folks who just have reduced hearing capabilities. There are mobility limitations. There are some folks who can really only use a keyboard to access different parts of a website, and really kind of the mouse would be off limits for them based on their mobility limitations. And so those are a different group of folks that we are serving through this work. And lastly, this was a big group of folks. When we talk about cognitive disabilities, we're really talking about, this could be folks who might be on the spectrum. This could be folks who have experienced a traumatic brain injury. These are folks who might even have physical reactions to certain things on a site, such as flashing images or colors of a certain brightness. You might even have, just a very adverse reaction to that. And so keeping that in mind, that is very broad. And you can even imagine, as you look at all of these folks, the different types of folks that we're serving in this work, that there are likely a lot of folks, even in that 28 or so percent that we mentioned earlier, who are affected by this. You can imagine that there are a lot of folks who just aren't even diagnosed with different disabilities, but they try to navigate the world. So I think that that's a very conservative number from the CDC. So just really keeping that in mind. So in 2024, we'll talk a little bit about the regulation and the obligation to WCAG. So the DOJ finalized this ruling in April of 24. So we're looking at a couple of years ago, okay? And there's been an iteration of WCAG-A, and then now we're at AA, and AAA, like I mentioned, is coming along before too long. It's being developed right now. And at this juncture, larger entities, which we'll talk about here on the next slide, are required to comply by the end of April. And the smaller entities, which I'll specify here in a moment, are required to comply by the end of April of the following year in 2027. So what does this mean? So there's it's kind of designated by public versus private. Okay, so with WCAG 2.1 AA, the government entities are obviously required to comply with this. There's Section 508 as well, that is the law that they are required to follow. But this WCAG really is about like the functional accessibility, the guidelines around that. And in this requirement, hospitals and health departments, those who are receiving government funding really are under this requirement. So those who typically the rule is serving 50,000 individuals or more. And then the private entities are those really who are serving less than that. So these might be private hospitals or private clinics, but really it's still expected. And I would say there are still legal issues that could arise even with that expected but not required. So just keeping that in mind. Now is really the time to get moving on this if you haven't already. So the compliance picture, it's really broader than just WCAG. And so I just wanted to take a brief moment and mention that. Measuring a brand's trust really is kind of a layered situation. So there's accessibility, which is what we're talking about today. There's also privacy, which, oh my goodness, as those who are involved in healthcare, I know you know, that is a major deal and is always at the top of mind of all of us, as well as just basic security. Okay, so the digital trust expectations are rising, and even the Indiana Consumer Data Protection Act began at the beginning of this year. So these expectations are really important and a focus at this juncture. Now we're going to get into a little bit of the meat and potatoes. Okay, we're going to delve into what the standard of WCAG 2.1 AA really means. So this is measurable conformance, and so the current requirements include everything that was in A, but also AA. So here over in level A, you can see that there are a lot of requirements already, and then you build upon those in double A. So in level A, you have things, the basic things, like your video should have caption, and you should be able to access your website through, your keyboard navigation. There should be things like page titles and error identifications that are actionable and understandable. As you get into double A, it becomes even more, because even over here in A, you have things like, a use of color, which you might see in the far left column. But as you get into AA, it becomes even more specific, and the stakes are a little higher. So as you see on the left, you have in A the use of color. However, in AA, you have a contrast of at least 4.5 to 1. So you have a lot more specificity around this. You have orientation and audio descriptions even. So not just your captions, but your audio descriptions, text spacing, and error suggestions that are even more specific. So it continues to build. So what is all this in plain English? What are really the key goals? That's where we'll get into here. So you probably have heard of this. In plain English, WCAG is boiled down to an acronym called POUR, which means that your site should be, and your apps should be perceivable, they should be operable, they should be understandable and robust. So what does all this actually mean? To be perceivable means there needs to be enough contrast. Let's say you have a lovely blue logo on a light, maybe chambray background on your website. And that contrast between your logo and the beautiful background that you have, while it might look really cool from a design perspective, if there's not enough contrast, which we were just talking about, it's not perceivable to folks who have low or no sight. So the or low sight. So with the other part of perceivable would be around alt text. So as folks are going through your site, I'm sure a lot of you know what alt text is, but if there's a picture of a woman at a laptop, your image needs to have the text that screen readers can identify and read out loud that there's a woman on a laptop. Captions allow things to be perceivable. So as you have all your videos, all of them, and not just one thing that's important is that it's not just AI generated, but there's a human who goes back through and makes sure that the captions are truthful, that they're really accurate, because we all know, when things are automated, there can be issues. And so making sure that it's actually correct. With operable, this comes down a lot to keyboard navigation. That's one of the operable issues. As I mentioned earlier, some folks are not able to use, because of mobility issues, a mouse to make their way through a website. And you can imagine that if there's not proper coding to make sure that the keyboard could be used to get, kind of to tab through or get to other places on a web page, maybe filling out forms or other things like that, the site's not really operable for them. And so keeping that top of mind. Making sure that you don't design in a way that causes seizures and physical reactions. This is a really important facet. And it's easy to overlook if that's not something that you or folks on your staff might experience. But really getting in touch with the things that would cause those kinds of physical reactions. I know for myself, I was involved in a car accident and now have a lot of sensitivity to a lot of movement. And I've even been in presentations where, video is just really flashy and I have to close my eyes. So just thinking about it through the lens of someone else is very important to make sure it's operable. As far as the U for understandable, making sure that there are clear labels for sections of your page and content forms. And a big part, and I know one of the questions that was sent over earlier, which we'll get into about a little bit deeper in this predictable behavior, but it comes down to, do the pages have a similar flow where I know this page, I can navigate to different places in a certain manner? And for instance, we'll talk about this in the Q&A section, but when a page would open into a new tab, will it tell me that if I'm using a screen reader? So predictable behavior is really helpful to know what's going on. And we'll talk about that again in just a little bit more depth soon. The last letter is robust. And we were talking before the rest of the folks kind of joined that that code can get in the way of and cause some hitches, whether you're using WordPress or other types of platforms, but really clean code that is made to maximize the assistive technology that would be used to access that page for those with disabilities. Very important that the code is incredibly robust. So where are the common gaps? What we often see in healthcare systems are 5 different areas that tend to cause issues and that are really important to address. Portals and scheduling, that's a big one. PDFs and documents, captions and videos, and maybe they're there, but they're not quite right. Definitely making sure that those are correct. Contrast. There are simple ways that you can run your content and pages through contrast ratios, making sure that they are perceivable. And lastly is even third-party tools. And so you probably know this, but just in case there's any misunderstanding there, if your website utilizes third-party tools, that does not make you exempt from issues with accessibility on their platform or what they provide to your site. So let's say you have, maybe there's a patient portal, or there is a billing platform, or a content system that feeds into your website. It all matters, and you'll still be judged. Essentially, you are the umbrella, and anything that you are utilizing, really, you will be judged for. So keeping that really top of mind. So we'll talk a little bit about the different gaps. Portals and scheduling, some of the things that we see are missing labels, the keyboard issues we talked about earlier, and unclear errors, which since we talked about the others a little bit, I want to touch on this one. So I even recently was on a website and I was filling out, this can do with, let's say you're filling out a patient intake form or maybe a scheduling request, whatever it might be for the website. But I recently was on a different website and it kept asking for my birth date. And the error that it kept giving me, I could not figure out how to get my my birth date in there in this very strange way they wanted it done. And the error was not clear. So just remembering that if folks are going through, perhaps their screen reader would be reading that to them. And if that still does not compute, it's not going to work for them. So being clear, not just for those who have disabilities, but those who just are trying to make their way through things efficiently. So it really impacts us all. PDFs and documents are another major gap. Sometimes when PDFs are made, for instance, there are scanned images, sometimes even of text, and we see that sometimes even just in on web pages themselves. There can be, and those are not readable. That content isn't, especially if you don't have alt text with it. The missing headings and tags, so if folks don't know what the different section might be, say, in the specialist consultation area, if that doesn't have its own section header, it can lead to some confusion and disorientation. So just remembering that the headings and tags really help folks make it through the content in a predictable way. And forms that require a mouse, we'll keep hitting on that. A lot of times that is a major stumbling block for folks who cannot utilize the mouse. The third and fourth gaps are around captions and contrast. Again, the videos really need to be not only captioned, but done very well and reviewed. So it needs to be accessible and read properly with the proper text showing what is going on the screen. And the low contrast and invisible keyboard focus. So the contrast we talked a lot about, that can be colors that are too close together. Something that you may or may not know is, there are folks who, they're even a disability with color blindness. So even thinking about all these different layers of accessibility. So with color blindness, a lot of times, folks will see, the grays and the greens and maybe even other colors as gray. So let's say you have, even on a white website, if you have gray text, that is very difficult for folks with color blindness to actually be able to perceive that. And so remembering that contrast is really, really important for a variety of folks. And the invisible keyboard focus, just making sure that when folks are trying to get to a certain place on the page, that they can actually see where they're where they are, where that little cursor is. Sometimes, you've probably seen that too, where you like, where am I on this page? I can't even tell. So making sure that you can see that. The fifth gap is third-party tools. So really your vendor tools, at the end of the day, they can break your compliance. You can have an incredible website, you can have your own portal, it can all be singing, but if you have a vendor tool, you still can be non-compliant. So one thing to ask for with your vendors is a voluntary product accessibility template. You've probably heard of these, but these are the VPATs. And this is a document that has the details around how a software or hardware conforms to Section 508 and WCAG. You're going to want to have that on hand. That kind of gives you a layer of protection as you have that with your third-party vendors. And you're going to want to review that with your IT department and your compliance as well to make sure it's all on the up and up. So here's where we'll get into a little bit more of the practical side of things, some of those meat and potatoes. So quick wins or things that you can, if you've already started with a company. I heard before we started, some folks are in the thick of things and some folks are, maybe around 80% done. I'm not sure where all of you stand, but these are things that you could maybe double check on your own, or if you haven't really gotten rolling on things, these could be places where you could start and kind of start checking out your site. So a couple quick fixes here. Alt text and captions. These are really good places to start. So the alt text really is the descriptor of the images that you have on your page. And not only having those, but it's really important when you start doing this on a complete site, that you have standards and training. So we always pick on Sally in HR. Maybe Sally's trying to be super helpful and she uploads this PDF onto the website, and it does not have the alt text. And all of a sudden, what yesterday was a compliant site that you were so proud of and finally slept through the night about is not compliant anymore if there's not alt text on this PDF. So having standards that are communicated system-wide is also a really important component that a lot of times isn't really spoken about. So just kind of planting a seed on this front end of things. Another fix is captions and transcripts as a default workflow. Again, it's your standards and your training. So perhaps you have a new video that is produced. It could even be through a third party, making sure that there are transcripts for those, that there are captions for those, and that is a standard and a workflow that will happen from this day forward for all the videos that are produced for your organization. Fix 3 and 4 have to do with contrast and keyboard. So contrast audits are really simple to perform. There are free websites where you can figure that out. I mean, you can put in and see if your site has a good contrast, and make sure that you update your contrast rules once you realize it. You could find out, hey, we are great, but maybe you're not and you need to update. Maybe you do have gray text and you decide, hey, instead of doing a darker gray, maybe we'll just go ahead and use black. Or if it's a lighter gray, at least going very, very much darker so it's more perceivable. With the keyboard, you can test some of the key tasks. For instance, maybe like a contact form on your site by using. You should be able to get from section to section in these forms by hitting Tab, Shift, and Tab, Enter. And that should be able to take you to the different form fields. 5 and 6, forms and PDFs. Again, the process around this is going to be so important, but we'll start from the bottom and kind of move up. We consider that your contact form is really top of the priority, right? That's your foundational document. If folks cannot get in touch with you in an accessible way, right off the bat, you're saying, our accessibility, we're not able to be accessed by you. And that creates a barrier between you and them and definitely impacts brand. So starting there, very important. You also want them to come in, right? You want them to be your patient. So on a positive side, it's great for you too. The next part would be around patient registration. So once they've contacted you and, forms are starting to come towards them to be able to fill out, sometimes these are sent through as PDFs and sometimes they're in online platforms, but all of this and providing medical history needs to be in a format that works accessibly. The next would be consent forms, which kind of goes along with all of these documents that are really important for the patient to be able to communicate back, and your scheduling platform, your forms that you have for that or your platform. And lastly, once they get in, they've contacted you, they've given you all the information you need, they've scheduled their meeting or they've scheduled their appointment with you. The last part would be they need to be able to access their discharge summary in a way that could be read to them and accessible. If there are maybe graphs, in platforms, in patient portals that they could see maybe their, overall time of, maybe they've had blood work over time and there's a graph, being able to see what it actually means in a way that is helpful to them. So all of that is very important. So internally, we find that's really useful to prioritize the top 5 patient forms and documents, the ones that are kind of your non-negotiables. And a great way to even extend your accessibility is to add it to requests for proposals, to contracts. So even getting getting HR involved in this, and any kind of procurement efforts that you have as well. Just goes beyond patients. So if you were to work with someone, and some of you already are, which is wonderful. And I'm very relieved to hear that, because we're already in mid-February and April will be here before we know it. Thank God, right? There's still piles of snow here in Indianapolis. That is for sure. But if you were to work with somebody like Good Aim, who does this process, or with someone else, just to kind of give you a sense of what to expect, I wanted to show you what it kind of looks like on a high level. And I'll tell you a little bit about these in the next few slides. So the beginning, there are 4 steps. So there's a pre-audit, very preliminary. Then there's a real deep discovery and a full audit of the website, which is more manual, and fully manual. And then there is a plan and remediation, so the actual fixing and the timeline of that. And then once it's done, we always like to say that websites are not brochures, and apps and portals and all of that, they're not brochures, right? They're always changing. And you might, like I said, have Sally from HR who is uploading things, or someone else who's just honestly trying to be helpful, but can take you out of compliance at a moment's notice. So there's always the monitoring and documenting, and that is a great way to show good faith effort. It's also a good way to show that you are trying to address all of the issues as quickly as possible, and proof of that. So the pre-audit is really an inventory of assets. What we find is that a lot of times healthcare organizations and other companies, they have no idea how big their websites are. In fact, I was talking with someone who's on this call from a hospital who told me the number of pages that they actually have, and it was really shocking, just even in the blog section. And the good news is, I would say, just as a quick side note, if your website is built properly, for instance, in a whole blog section, there should be able to be kind of universal edits made in a way that, once it's determined, should be able to kind of apply down the chain with your different blog posts. So it shouldn't be as difficult to update every single page. So there should be kind of those universal things that can be changed from a coding standpoint. So fingers crossed that your site is built that way, and that can work out for you. But understanding where your assets are, where are they? What do you have? What's the breadth of your site? Because that really matters. And running scans to understand, get a general sense of what are some of the most important parts, the hottest items that really are out of compliance. The full audit really moves into something that is very manual. So this is manual testing with screen readers, with keyboard navigation testing, and then producing a prioritized issues list, along with, hey, this is what it would cost to remediate all of this. And with our group, we do things with, being able to split it out. We have a software, which I'll show you here in just a moment, but we have a software where you can kind of divide and conquer. Maybe it's, here are the videos that are out of compliance, but you want to handle those internally. So these will be assigned to Allison, and she'll make sure that all of those are done. And there are ways to track all of that to make sure it is in fact done and compliant and checked off. Steps 3 and 4, the remediation process, it's not necessarily for the faint at heart. And I'm sure there are folks who are on this call that would tell you that, because I know there are several who've already started down this path. But remediation, this really begins with a plan. It's kind of this accessibility roadmap with the owners, with the timeline, really getting super clear on what are the most critical errors, what are the high, what are the medium, what are the kind of those, things that are still part of compliance, but if you're going to get flagged, not as critical as the ones that are above it. Really updating, like I mentioned with the blogs, updating templates, even so that new pages are accessible by default. This is a brilliant way to work smarter, not harder. And lastly, the monitoring and documenting, that's a requirement. So including quarterly scans and remediations, could even be monthly. I mean, if your website is getting updated quite a bit, just figuring out what would be best for your size of entity, and those annual reviews, the documentation. So exporting, the compliance reports, really important to make sure that you have documentation of your remediation efforts. I did want to share with you briefly a little bit about what I've been talking about, how this could look, or how it does look in our software called ClearShot. Good Aim produced this, and I'm very, very proud of it. And I want to tell you a little bit about it. So it tracks all of your accessibility issues from all of your platforms. And as you can see in kind of this little image over here, if you can see very small, there's a severity column. There's even like a status. Is this something that has been completed? If it's a priority, if it's WCAG compliant, there's an assignee. We can assign this out to different folks on our team, on your team, and when this issue was created. So maybe Sally uploaded something on Monday morning and the issue was created on Tuesday. So you can kind of get that there. Once you open each of these up in that first task, there'll be even things where you can upload documents. Hey, this PDF is done, ready to be uploaded, or here's the final document for our records. And there can be back and forth conversation between folks who are part of that task. It's really lovely. And so you can see kind of, on a main website, you can see, okay, wow, almost 2,000 issues on this particular site. And we've got it down to 0 critical and 0 open, finished those. And that's where you can write your accessibility statement, and your compliance certificate can be written up as well. There's real-time visibility through all this, as you can see in the remediation progress, prioritization through all of this. The workflow is very streamlined, from discovery through the fix and to validation that it is complete. There are these role-based accesses. If certain entity or certain parts of your team should only be able to deal with certain parts and others with others, that can be kind of firewalled, if you will. There's AI-powered guidance in this, and you might be seeing this in other platforms, not even necessarily in compliance, but as there are issues that pop up, if someone on your team, maybe it's a web person on your team or a compliance person who has access, like, what is this issue and why is it so critical? There's AI-powered guidance around why it is required and what it really means, and suggested ways to fix it as well. So we're all kind of on the same page of what is going on with each of these tasks. There are automated imports from scans, and that eliminates kind of a lot of time. So manual entry of these issues. And this is compliance that is tracked and organized by WCAG A, AA, and AAA, which we are currently building out and we can finalize that once we get the final report. So this, the software will continue to grow and expand as the compliance increases those requirements. So these exportable reports are very useful and necessary, really, for your stakeholders, your legal team, any kind of documentation and audits. So that's a little bit about it. One thing that I did want to kind of give you as food for thought before we kind of move into the last section here is, when you go back to your team, if you have other folks on your team you can talk to about this, I think it's important to ask some of these questions. What tasks would break first for a screen reader user? And even if folks on your team know that, that's really important. That's a good first question to ask. Asking what is the least accessible channel at this particular juncture. Maybe your website's doing great, but maybe there's a separate patient portal that really isn't. What would you fix in the next 30 days? If there are things, do you know what the critical issues are and what really should be prioritized? Because it can feel very overwhelming. But I find that a lot of times, if I'm feeling overwhelmed with a lot of tasks, just really breaking it down to what is most important right now. So getting really clear and making sure that you know what those critical things are. And just thinking about, I know this has been a flurry, and I have I feel for all of you as you're going through this. And that's why we are, doing these presentations in around the country, honestly, and because we really do want to help. And I know probably some of you have been through a lot of stress. I just want to acknowledge that and realize that you're being asked to understand something and implement something and be, liable for something that is complicated. And honestly, probably not what any of us went to, college for. So just acknowledging that and recognizing that that has been a stress. And on the flip side, asking, what would it say about your brand if you could confidently say you're accessible? And what would that do for your sleep at night? So thinking about those sorts of things and talking with them about your team, these are good conversation starters. So we all know that the time is running out, and there are, if you haven't started or you're stuck, maybe you might be having some difficulty justifying this expense. It's not going to be a quick or cheap fix, right? These are some reasons to really weigh out if you need to cross the finish line, which I would highly suggest you do. So I'm going to give you a few bullet points here around the cost of waiting. ADA lawsuits surged 37% in the first half of 2025, with over 2,000 cases filed just in 6 months. And there are whole law firms really that are kind of spinning up around ADA compliance. And as you know, healthcare is very targeted. It is one of the most targeted industries for compliance of all types. And one thing that has been really disturbing is learning about how there are a lot of serial plaintiffs, so folks who are finding these issues and presenting lawsuits, but even some of them are using automated scanning tools. So it's not just humans going in and saying, I actually want to set an appointment with this company or this organization. It can just be bots essentially and IDing these violations, which then sends it into a lawsuit. And what we have seen is that a very common outcome is that there's a demand letter, right? And there often is a quiet settlement. So there is money that is being paid. And at that juncture, the entity has been called into question. And if they are found to be failing at compliance, the remediation will be required, plus that payment to those who sent the demand letter. So it's kind of like paying twice, which is a really good reason just to get it done without having to do that. Sometimes we've been asked about a quick fix, so overlays, widgets, that sort of thing. However, this can really increase your legal risk. And I'll explain it here in the next section. In 2024, which is not that long ago, about a quarter of the ADA lawsuits specifically cited accessibility widgets and overlays. So really what you need to remember is that WCAG is really all about the functional accessibility guidelines. So the courts really care that, and they held that real accessibility is required and not the appearance of effort. And if you do try to do a quick fix, it really is a flag indicating that you knew compliance was required, but you chose a cheaper route that actually was not to the code. So it's not going to work out in your favor. So 100% do not recommend that. One thing that we have to give to you guys, and we'll send this out afterward, just wanted to let you know what to expect kind of next, is we do have a one-sheeter that we'll send over to you, and that can open a discussion if you have further questions or needs. Please feel free to reach back out. We'd love to start the discussion with you. And so this is one share. You can share it maybe with other people in your marketing department, IT, compliance, web, patient experience, whatever it might be. So we'll be sending that out afterward. And I know you should be getting a recording of this as well. You can also share with other folks as part of your team to keep the conversation going. The other thing I am offering is a 20-minute discovery call. Really, if you have decision makers to come to that, just so we can all be on the same page about where you are with things, and to be able to share with you your website in through our software. I'm doing this for free. If you would like to set up a 20-minute call, you can get a sense for some of the critical errors. You'll walk away with some concrete information, whether you want to talk to us ever again or not. At least you'd have a little bit to walk away with, and yeah, be able to see what it would look like if you were to remediate some of those things in our software, just to kind of try it on for size, but also just ask questions and see if there's any way that we could be of service for you. One thing that I always like to call people back to, especially here as we kind of wrap up, is that there's a real human impact that I never want us to forget. I know that we've talked a lot about deadlines. We've talked about requirements. We've talked about, what is really being expected of all of us, and that there might even be lawsuits, and there are all these layers to this onion. However, all of it is for folks who really need access to the services that your entities provide. And just remembering that this is the avenue. There are moms who are trying to help their children. There are people who are trying to navigate this life with disabilities. And it's a beautiful thing to give them the access that they need. And quite honestly, they are a very large portion of your potential client base. And so when it comes down to even back to that dollars and cents, it makes a lot of sense to do this and to do it right. So April is coming soon, and this is my last reminder to say it takes time to remediate. This isn't something that happens overnight. So if you haven't started or you're starting to dabble into it, highly encourage you to rally the team, talk about these deadlines, talk about the implications, and get a plan moving forward. Whether you want, a 20-minute chat with us, or you start interviewing a variety of folks, I highly recommend that. So at this juncture, I wanted to talk a little bit about the questions that were submitted, and I see we're about 45 minutes. We've still got a chunk of time, so I wanted to hop into this. And then if there are other things, I'm open to those. And I will say, if I don't know the answer, I will get with our lead web developer, and I will get the answer, and I will share that in an email afterwards. So you have that. So that is my promise to you. So we'll hop into the first question here. It was, what is a checklist of what is due in May? So April, May, we talked about the ADA.org versus the hospital site, but a checklist of what is due in May and what is due after. Honestly, by the initial deadline, organizations should have remediated to the WCAG 2.1 AA issues across their public site, any key user journeys, and completed the automated but also manual testing. And a part that we haven't really talked a whole lot about is even, so there's manual testing by folks like, the team here at Good Aim, who would go in and use screen readers and kind of test it to make sure what is in and out of compliance before a remediation plan was in place. But really, it's important to have like pre-screened or professional folks with disabilities even test it afterward, and there's usually like just a flat fee for having that done, but I highly encourage that sort of compliance level as well, to make sure that nothing is blatantly overlooked. I think that's really important, or even small things are overlooked. But documenting the accessibility government process is really important. And that's where having a group that can help you with compliance and providing an export of really what has been done and remediated is very important. So keeping that part in mind, that you have that documentation. And after May, great question. As we talked about in the presentation, after May, the compliance becomes ongoing. It's through those regular, the remediation and the periodic audits, staff training, those templates and the key workflows, continuing to make it so your content is accessible by default. I think that's really kind of the ultimate goal in all of this. So if there are further questions around that, I have even a deeper dive into that. In fact, I've even been thinking about, I might even take some of your questions and I could come up with maybe a post that goes into even deeper detail around some of this, because these are really important questions, and making sure that you have all those bullet points of things to make sure that you're checking off is really important. Another question that was brought up was around accessibility in visual and media formats. And I think I'm not sure if the designer, I think there's at least a designer that came on to the call, or at least RSVP'd if they're on the call. I'm sure they're perking up here, but accessibility across the media means providing text alternatives to the images so they can be read by screen readers, the captions in the video and audio descriptions as well for the videos, the keyboard and screen reader support for your websites, the alt text and captioned media on social platforms, which we haven't even really delved into all of that. That's a whole nother aspect of this, making sure that your socials are accessible. But just remembering that even if your platforms are third party, you're still responsible for making the published content accessible. So just remember all of that. And I really like this. The third question that came through was about coding for new windows in WordPress that are WCAG compliant. And we took this question as meaning opening new windows, making sure that that is compliant. And so WCAG does not prohibit the use of opening new windows from your web page, but it does require that the users are informed before the change in context occurs. So for instance, yesterday, I was listening to a page because my eyes were getting tired. As I mentioned, I'm still kind of recovering from an accident, and my eyes were getting tired. And so I was listening to this page, and every time it got to a section that would have a link, it would say, opens a new page, I think is the verbiage that was used. And so it allowed me to know that particular text. And while in some ways it was a little jarring, but it helped me know that there could be access to other information that could come out of that. So just to kind of give you a for instance of what that would be like. If you're in WordPress, if a link opens in a new tab, just include that clear text indicating that behavior would be happening, and to ensure that the focus will be properly handled for them. And really, honestly, most accessibility flags would occur when links open unexpectedly. As you can understand, that would be even disorienting for me, or they lack that warning text. So yeah, that's how you comply with that particular portion. So if Nakia is open to it, I'm open to other questions, or if you guys want to chat about anything, any issues you're going through, I'm here for you. So I'm happy to do whatever Nakia wants us to do.
Absolutely. Please feel free, if you have any additional questions for Aimee, go ahead and put those in the chat, or just to keep order, if you want to raise your hand and we can recognize your hand to raise those questions. If you saw in the chat, we will be sending out the presentation. So if there was anything that was kind of gone over a little fast, because we are within that hour time frame, um, you know, we'll definitely make sure you get the presentation so that you can review it. But if you have something now that you want to ask Aimee, please feel free. This is your time to do so. Krista, I think, put something here for the podcast. Does the transcript cover us for the captions? We have these embedded in our website.
Does transcript cover the captions?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I believe so, but I will double check on that to make sure that that is the full requirement. So I've written down that question and I will send that in my follow-up email. That's a great question. Krista.
I have a question for you. And this is post, I guess, once the organizations become compliant or whatever, how often should they do checks? It's suggested that they do checks to stay on top of making sure their sites are compliant.
It kind of depends on how often the site is updated. And I would say probably having remediation. My recommendation would be at the beginning that it would be something that is done monthly. That way, as more systems are being put in place and people are being trained, and your templates on the website are becoming more and more robust. So compliance is the default is kind of the mantra. Probably having it more frequently at the beginning, and then if there are fewer and fewer issues, it's possible that it could go out even to quarterly. I wouldn't go beyond that, but I think particularly at the beginning, doing that monthly would be my recommendation.
Thanks. Were there any other questions? Looks like we're down to a minute or so left for our presentation. If there are none, I thank you, Aimee, so much for your presentation. I think it was great, very informative. I want to ask our president, Allison, did she have any more comments or anything that you want to make before we end the webinar?
No, thank you everyone for coming. Like mentioned, we will send out the recording to this presentation, and I know all of us are kind of in the thick of it right now with this, and so we really appreciate Aimee's time and expertise.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for having me.